Welcome back home, Paula Lalinde. We know her. You will see why she's coming back home. She's more than a friend to the Mailman Center. All right. She has a doctoral degree, Paula, Dr. Petry, has a doctoral degree in teaching and learning from the University of Miami. In 1986, she rallied parents together and they founded Parent to Parent of Miami, a nonprofit organization supporting parents who have a family member with a disability. She worked on the national, state, and local levels, advocating family-centered focused services before coming to the Mailman Center for Child Development in 1994. She served as our director of training from 2000 to 2006, bringing the arts and family involvement into our training programs. In 2006, she resigned her position to complete her dissertation and in addition discovered an ancient healing modality. She's an author and presenter on holistic well-being and serves on the faculty at Ubiquity University working with youth. Take it away, Paula.
Oh, thank you. So wonderful to see everybody, and Dr. Friedman as well, and Shelley Bear. Knew briefly in our time together in Miami. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share a bit about my personal story, and then I'll put it for all of us in the context of indigenous worldview. I look at research that supports my own personal experiences and the indigenous worldview, and then we'll explore the relevance of this for today's really mental health crises. And so let me do a slide share. And I'll begin by reading a bit from my book. I'll do that in a second, but I begin. The most horrific grief, and that's our topic today, our most horrific grief comes from the loss of a child. On July 5th, 1996, my daughter Alexandra, at 12 years of age, died. She died one day after being released from the hospital. I found her dead in the morning, the repercussions of a malfunctioning shunt. She had just finished the 6th grade where she received the class Most Courageous Award, courageous for her determination, persistence, her hard work, despite her disability, having been born with spina bifida, unable to walk from birth. My daughter's death sent me on a quest, one for a deep understanding of who I am, why I'm here, and what my suffering and my daughter's suffering means to me as a mother, a woman, and someone interested in the sciences. That quest led me to the most unexpected, improbable, unlikely experiences. Oh dear, why is that doing that? Okay, and A Mother's Courage to Awaken, 2020, Mango Publishing House. I stood in front of the door of the psychic medium's small cottage, feeling nervous but ready to face whatever was on its other side. My academic mind had turned off enough to do something irrational, to consult someone who thinks he can speak with the dead. My knee-jerk reaction of saying, "Sign me up," had come right after I heard he will be arriving on July 5th, and his first appointment is at 10 o'clock. The synchronicity was jolting, as was my memory. On a July 5th, 11 years earlier, I watched as the Coral Gables fire rescue truck in the Miami-Dade County's coroner vehicle parked in front of my yard, and the EMT workers wheeled my daughter's body out on a stretcher. My anger, guilt, grief, and loss had subsided over the years, but the body memory from the trauma and the years of blaming myself were still there. I felt an ache in my chest and a pain in the pit of my stomach as I heard the date. The feeling of having done something wrong had left me sullen. When Alex died, people warned that life would never be the same. But why would anyone say a thing like a black cloud will always follow you was beyond me. However, I was inspired to not always live under a black cloud, but 11 years was a long time. Maybe they were right. Yes, there I stood outside of a small white beach cottage in Pompano Beach, Florida. The door opened and I saw a tall man with a kind face, and I walked in. I took a seat in the kitchen and began sipping the herbal tea I was offered. Then I introduced myself. I resigned from my longtime faculty position at the medical school and sold my house, and I have a few belongings. I don't have any questions about any of that. I came to commune with my daughter. Oh, I know, dear. She's been waiting for you. Others were there too. You could say the room was packed. As he talked, I scribbled notes on my yellow pad and now rumpled with dried tears. Memories of my younger brother, Jim's death, was there also. The man knew my brother was dead, but how was that possible? But it was Alex's presence for which I had longed for. Mom, it was my time to go. I love you. Thank you. He said she appeared to him as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, the very classic story about a hero's journey and life transforming itself. And she continues, Mom, you are the wizard. And remember, the wizard is fake. So my daughter's death sent me on this quest of deep understanding. And then the meeting with the psychic left me this question of, is this real? How in the world could this be possible? Just in the parent-to-parent days, everybody kind of stumbled in front of my path. I couldn't have, looking back, I couldn't have missed them, right? As the future board of directors came into being. It was the same in this unveiling of what was next to me to understand and to experience and perhaps share with others. So it was a lunch with a colleague soon after. colleague, and she told me about a psychologist, a PhD psychologist, Miami, but had worked with anthropologist, a medical anthropologist, Alberto Villoldo from UCLA, who had studied 25 years with the Quiro shamans in Peru and authored many books. She handed me one of his books and I held it and I said, I just know that I'm going to study with him. My BA being in anthropology, and was so still interested in that. It was a year-long program going around what's called the medicine wheel, the 4 cardinal directions, each direction learning more about myself, indigenous precepts and ancient practices, specifically how to direct energy in healing myself for the purpose of myself and for others. My slides are. There is a growing interest in the indigenous worldview. Four Arrows, the author, one of the authors of Restoring the Kinship Worldview, spoke at the UN recently, and Braiding Sweetgrass author Robin Wall Kimmerman. This book is required or was required reading for all NYU incoming freshmen in 2021. A Google search of indigenous practices yields 270 million websites in a half a second. This interest is fueled by the expanded research in global consciousness, climate change, and holistic health. Today we will explore three precepts held in the indigenous worldview: the existence of a web of life, the medicine wheel, its 4 directions, and we are not separate from nature. The web of life. The spider woman in the Lakota tradition is the spider woman and is known to or is attributed the power to create and give birth to new life. And we have the other slide there representing the quantum field. So is the web of life, is this interconnectedness of life real? Seattle, Chief Seattle, I live here on the original lands of the Squamish Nation outside of Seattle, and his grave is 20 minutes from my home. And he shares from this indigenous view and that humankind has not woven the web of life. We didn't weave the web of life, and we're not weaving it. We are but one thread within it. And whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together and all things are connected. And we have that. And so we ask the question, is this interconnectedness, it's an indigenous, it's a globally indigenous worldview, held belief. And so we turn to science about the unifying field. Science is always discovering new things, and some of the findings confirm our current world view, while others do not. And our existing model of reality is EM squared and states that everything is matter and energy. But now with quantum mechanics findings from the 1930s, continued discoveries, this is not set in stone. Obviously, this is under discovery, right? That there's kind of new discoveries, new research that aren't fitting into this model. And it's an existence that there's actually three elements. There's the energy, there's matter and information. The existence of an information field that then provides explanation to the findings, my own personal experiences, but the findings that I'll share with you today. That everything is energy, and that's carried on these energy waves. And this is a spectrum of relative density and subtleness. That time and space are not linear as we once thought. The past is intrinsically connected to the future, mediated perhaps by the present. The indigenous explanation of time being circular perhaps is actually kind of more accurate. Our awareness, intention, and attention, and we'll come back to this through the hour, influence that reality at a subtle level and how it will then come into dense manifest. So things are created or exist in the invisible world and then come into manifest into this denser manifest world that we experience with our five senses. This 3D reality is where the energy waves have become standing, meaning that they have clicked into this level of coherence that creates a density that we see around us. In the relative world of Newtonian laws of linear time and space, those apply, but however, science is discovering that there are other laws that apply that are now being understood. So it's a question of, is consciousness live outside of self? Is this world really interconnected? So we look at how would we measure that? How would we know that that's true? So we can turn to the science of global consciousness. That's part of what we just talked about. The psi phenomena, extrasensory perception, precognition, psychokinesis, mind over affects matter, but also technology. We know that brain waves now exist above the skull. We know for a fact we are surrounded by electromagnetic field, our individual selves, but also we're within the Mother Earth's electromagnetic field. Dean Radin, just to look at a couple things in this area. Dean Radin is now the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, but he was involved in the Stanford Research Institute's remote viewing program. That program ran from 1972 to 1995. It was funded by the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA for the purpose of gathering information about Russia's military expansion during the Cold War. Knowing people who were personally involved in all of that, apparently it was that Russia was getting ahead of us and in this area of remote viewing. And so we ramped up our own efforts. Russia had over 120 psychics, the US around 30. And the project called Stargate, you can now, that findings are declassified by Clinton. It was that many, some of the documents. So in 23 years, over that expanded period of time, $20 million was put into that project. Ed May, a physicist, directed it. And he shares that there were definitely just spot on, very helpful readings, remote viewings of what was going on. Shares one about a submarine, and all the individual was given was a image of a roof, photo of a roof, inside an envelope, inside another, whatever. And from that, he extrapolated that this specific type of submarine was being built into quite detail. Dr. Radin is now in the Institute of Noetic Sciences. One exploration is on precognition. Is it possible to know something before it happens? Many of you may have had those experiences, having dreams, and Dr. Larry Dosey's work is all about that, having dreams, and then he would go to the hospital the next day, and they were unfolding in reality. So I began to question this area of research for him. But for precognition, they've done studies where participants are exposed to emotionally stimulating stimuli and their physiological responses, heart rate variability, blood pressure, the galvanic skin response, electrodermal activity, those are measured. So it's a black screen, there's no image up, but the next image is of particular, that would emotionally stir the individual. Deep sadness, an image that would create a look of tragedy, disaster, for example. And significantly, people were predicting what was coming up on the next slide. Of course, they were random, and all types of very typical research controls were applied. So it suggested that participants showed physiological responses that anticipated the stimuli. We can also look at Lynn McTaggart's work of Power of 8. She did work in and continues the collective intention of a group. That is, can we set the intention to send energy, to send our thoughts across time? That's the idea of this interconnected web. One of her experiences, many of these are kind of rare anomalies, but when you get so many and you set up the experiment to measure whether or not they will have effect, it becomes more meaningful. And, Wayne was diagnosed with a large inoperable tumor, and there was a spontaneous remission and undetectable within a few weeks. She also has done with high crime areas, very narrow focused neighborhoods. Same idea of remote viewing. Over time, space collapses. You can put yourself in another space and time, and you can affect it by sending your intention, attention, and you have the awareness of that person, place, and so forth. And so many different studies on that. In Sri Lanka, this particular neighborhood, the group gathered group of 8 over several months, and the measure of crime rate before and after was significantly different. A fun experiment is this IKEA experiment. I've talked to schools about this, and these were set up with plexiglass and piped in so children could come and bully this plant and say wonderful things about the other plant. The idea that our words, our intention, the sound, all of it carries meaning, and the meaning carries an energy, quality, frequency that matches. So this is, you can see what happened over a 30-day period of time. This has been replicated in many ways using rice. Dr. Emoto's study that has been replicated as well using water and the effects of thought and music and so forth on water. So let's turn to the second precept. is a cyclical nature of life. For Native Americans, this is the medicine wheel. 280 some tribal nations throughout the Americas had kind of embraced the medicine wheel in one form or another. We see that within this, it holds great meaning. In terms of grief and loss, it is that we live, we're born, we live, we die, and then there's this incredible transformation that happens upon death, and there's a rebirth that happens. And for the Native Americans, it is not in terms of reincarnation as much as it is that our ancestors are there, their guidance, they're present, they can be drawn upon, the wisdom is always there. So this sense of being alone and loneliness and kind of lost and wandering in the world, that so much of what we see people experiencing today, I believe, is mitigated through this knowing that life lives on. But does it? That's been my experience. We turn to Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross for a specific reason. She actually she's an amazing woman, and I only knew her in terms of the stages of grief until I got involved in all of this. She was the most prominent contributor, really, to our understanding of grief today. She's a psychiatrist, Swiss-German heritage. She gave us the 5 stages. We'll run through them briefly as a review. She was manic almost in working with dying, very inspiring. She began working with dying adults at a time in the 80s, 70s, 80s, where people didn't want to be around dying people in a way. Now we have hospice, right? So we kind of compartmentalized it a bit. But then she worked with people with AIDS and children with AIDS and was a strong advocate about that. And she says about death, I know for a fact that there's life after death, strong statement, that death is this beautiful transition to a spiritual realm full of unimaginable love. So how did she come to that? She saw the spirit leaving the body. I've met people, I haven't, but I've met grief psychologists that have. And so the core essence, our spirit of that part of self that never dies, it leaves the body at the time of death. And she had many experiences communing with spirit all the time, really. She talked about it, actually, guardian angels, spirits, described visits with Jesus. She stated in a Washington Post interview that she thought in the next decade would have the technical advances to really capture this. And I think we're getting closer. But here are the 5 stages of grief. We know denial, guilt and anger, bargaining, the sadness and depression, and acceptance. One of her close colleagues actually was Dr. Raymond Moody. I taught for Ubiquity University on regenerative power of grief. And he was one of my guests, and I had the opportunity. It was very significant for me because I remember sitting in 1996, shortly after my daughter died, on the staircase of a friend who lost her son almost that same month, and whispering about his book and could it be true and what did she think, and we were in this low voice. He has a very interesting experience with it. As a young man in his own home, a physician came and told the family a family story around dinner about a near-death experience that he had. And later, when he was a philosophy professor, a student came and told him the same experience. And that opened up actually what then became his life work. So 1,000 individuals he's interviewed, the qualitative analysis of it shows that these are very familiar, common experiences. So a person is near death, but leaves the body, is hovering over the body, going through a dark tunnel. There's a very, very bright light, being told by an illumined being or a loved one, or just feeling, sensing it's not your time, and to go back. The interesting thing of all the phenomena is interesting, but their life changes forever. Recently, after no contact with a niece, she told me about her near-death experience. She knew nothing about kind of my work per se. And she then, common in other experiences, she sees this incredible white light. And when she came back into her body and back into herself and escaped the horror that she was in the midst of, she committed to stop using drugs. And she has. But that's a common experience. There's a recommitment to life, like there's something greater than this 3D world, and it's very present, real. After death communication, lots of research about this. 3/4 of the people within these studies within a year hear from their loved one. It could be many people I've talked to. A client of mine walked home and went into her house, and the cigar smell of her father-in-law, but there were actually cigar ashes onto the floor of the living room. Pictures that are all sideways, the telephone that rings and you answer it, no one's there. The presence, the visual experience of that loved one being present with them. Again, the impact is very similar because it takes us out of this mind 3D caught world that we tend to live in, and gives us this feeling of awe and a sense of mystical experience, and very comforting to know that what we know in the Judeo-Christian, that life, that our loved ones waiting for us, and life is like the comfort to have faith, I would say, is Judeo-Christian, to have faith in that we will see our loved ones again. But to see them and experience them is very different. And then that experience provides this great comfort. Alan Botkin, another psychologist, worked with vets. EMDR was his modality for trauma. A vet came in, and in his experience, he was giving his usual treatment modality, but he changed it just in this small way, really. It was silent because the individual, the patient was silent, but he was having this whole experience. And his trauma was much around Leah, who was 12 years old. And Leah was the only survivor when they bombed her village. And she came in and lived with the troop, but then they were attacked, and she died in that attack, really under his protection. And that was a lived trauma that he was struggling with. So in what happened in this change in the EMDR process is that Leah came to him and spoke to him and said, "I am fine," and thanked him profusely for what he did. And that, of course, was a huge transformation in terms of his trauma grief. And Alan Botkin went on and developed induced after-death communication. He's trained several thousand therapists and has collected solid research and showing the impact of being able to commune with one's loved one. My personal experiences, I have so many to share. It was like, which ones do I share? Just a fun one was I was going home a couple years ago to see my mother, and it was a family drama. My brother was involved, money was involved, elderly abuse was involved, and I didn't know much of it. I knew I was going home. It was end of COVID, and I needed to get home and check things out. So I was renting a car at National Car Rental, O'Hare Airport. And I'm there, and the woman's very nice to me. It seemed it was a little bit nicer than usual, but it was nice and chatty a bit. And so I get my car, and she comes around. She goes, "Oh, let me show you. I'll walk you out. Oh, let me carry your luggage." I'm like, And she turns to me, she's kind of on the side, right? And she goes, "You've helped a lot of people." I go, "Well, maybe a few." And she goes, "I'm going to share my gift with you." So we leave the building. She's rolling my bag. And she goes, I upgraded you. And so here's already parked, the car had been pulled up, this silver, I don't know, like souped up car, beautiful car, and was there waiting for me. And she turns to me and she goes, "Your daughter's telling you that everything is okay. Don't worry about everything, but your brother's not going to let go of the money." And so is there an information field, right? We don't know exactly how all of that works, but I have no doubt there's an information field. And just behind, we call the veil, our loved ones. And we think of the ancestor kind of worship of Native Americans and indigenous people, because they know their ancestors are there, right? And their remembrance of them is so important. I would say for the Power of Eight, I run a facilitated Power of Eight group. So every week for 2 years, every Monday, we pull up an image of an individual. And then for 7 minutes, we're in silence and we tracking the energy, the information in the field, and then we direct energy towards it. So you can track it, it's information, but on these wavelengths, we can send, just as our thoughts are information, our energy, so is this loving intention that we can direct towards someone. So in 2 years, we've never disagreed whether there's cancer or not, whether the knees problem is on the right or the left, if it's the kidney, which kidney would, we have never agreed on our ability to track. Or the recovery process and what we expect. We don't follow up, and it's a one-time healing. We come from different trainings and backgrounds. We have a nurse involved, so that gives us additional information in terms of recommendations. It's no medical information, just a recommendation of other forms. So I want to talk about this particular Healy, a friend of mine from the 1970s. I was her maid of honor, archaeologist. I was an archaeologist in Mexico for 1.5 years. I would say studied archaeology. And she had fibrosis of the lungs, and we reconnected in this past 7 or 8 years. So I brought her image to the group. And so 7 minutes, take down the image. Everyone except myself, because I had missed it because I was blindsided, said soul possession. I'm not working with her. But all of that is too dark. She came into a lot of dark forces over her career. And so we think about, in this field of light and dark, and we know about in terms of psychological terms, but what if there was application beyond the psychological and constructs to really apply into the reality of energy that exists in the invisible? One of our members of the 8, not there that day, is a Catholic priest from Philadelphia. The parish had asked him, or the archdiocese, I guess, would have asked him to assist in the exorcisms, that they were increasing, they are across the board, increasing the number of Catholic priests that have the ability to provide exorcisms. That's removing this dark force that has kind of overtaken the thought forms, really, of the individual, or the well-being of the individual. He went on and studied with the Four Winds Society, where I studied, and the group most of us have studied, in order to be more prepared to contribute. And he gave us a 2-3 hour presentation about exorcism within the Catholic Church to the degree that he could, very similar to the processes that we do. So no one felt qualified. So I became known in Miami when I did the healing work there as somebody who would take on the dark forces. People would always refer them to me. And I think it's because of the fear of I think what happens when you survive something so horrific, you become fearless. And I became a little too fearless, and I write about it in my book because I had my own dark night with the soul of taking on things that I wasn't prepared for. But I felt prepared. And 30 weeks later, every week, she came back as the image to the group. I didn't say much about it. And she had clear, like no dark energy. So that was a wonderful thing. One of the sessions, I said, I'm looking down and I'm seeing this image next to me, an essence of something. And I could see fat, short legs from like the calf down and fat feet. I was like, wow, and I just start describing it to her and I go, oh, it's kind of like a dwarf, but it's not a dwarf. And she goes, oh, that's a Chineke. And this is an image of a Chineke. In Nahuatl, Chineke means those who inhabit dangerous places, and they're known for spirit possession. She was really a non-believer, but in the end, she loved the rattling. She loved the sound. She felt better every time after we met. And she became a believer when this happened. So it was one of the last sessions that I gave her. And we both saw the same thing at the same time. And this was like a slug, image of a slug leaving her right foot. So the ontological nature, this is how I understand it. This is, the ontological nature, Carl Jungian explanation in dream analysis. I study dream analysis. The ontological nature is in this invisible world. This is the archetypal energies, right? Are in the invisible. And then they show up in this condensed 3D world in a way that we understand them. The core essence of this slimy slug leaving the body was not missed. I don't want to go over. I want to give us time to talk. But something maybe Dr. Brasco would appreciate because he was my son's pediatrician. But my son and his girlfriend came to live with me during COVID, and I had a downstairs, upstairs house. And so they were living downstairs, an electric lazy boy that I had purchased for my mother. And so you hit the button and right, and you go up and down and can stand up, all these wonderful things for mobility. And they knew wherever I was in the house because it would be kind of the thudding that would go on. So they knew when I was not in the chair, and just the two of them could hear the chair being moved. And this had happened over several weeks of time, and I would tell me and I would ignore it. And it was kind of like, oh, okay. I was just like, didn't tap into it. But then both of them were up, and my sons and mom, last night, the noise was so loud, I had to put earplugs in my ear. This was in the middle of the night. So I sat with it. I was like, what am I doing? I know how to help people transition. So there's this understanding in my experience that people get caught in this material world, in this 3D world. And they need assistance by creating this awareness, intention, and this love energy of calling upon their ancestors. Please come and retrieve them, opening up the portal. And I thought, what am I doing? And I then remembered that I told a friend across the lake at her house, I think she had kind of entities in her house, disincarnate beings. No. So I think they followed me home. So is there any proof that I actually helped them transition? There's two things I will just say. One, several weeks later, I asked them both if they ever heard the sound again. And they go, no, we didn't. No, we haven't heard it. The other thing was 2 nights after the transition, helping them, individuals transition, I tracked they were 88. I had a dream. So in the dream, there was like a worm, I figured out it was a centipede on my teeth and gum. And it was orangish brown. And I took it off very calmly, put it on the ground. It went along the floor and up the wall and out. I had these very thick doors, and there was a perfect round hole drilled out. And then the worm or the insect went out the hole. That's what I remember, like, oh, okay, boom. And sitting with the dream in the morning, it was orange brown. It was lots of legs. What is that? Kind of in that daze. I'm like, oh my God, that's a centipede. And then how you work with dreams, right? You say it out loud, you look at each word, what the meaning. It was like, oh, a worm. And it went through the wormhole, a centipede. 100 legs went through the wormhole. So that's that experience, a beautiful experience that from the indigenous worldview of not being alone. And that's why I find is so helpful with my grief. I live a somewhat of a solitary life, but never feel alone. And there's an epidemic of loneliness. But I went in to help a friend, lives in South Miami, in 1905 Cracker House. And and the dogs aren't well, I'm not well, something feels odd in the house, come and see what you find. So I get to the bathroom and I kind of feel like I've ran into an individual. And I said, no, is there an elderly lady that lived close by? Because she's here. She goes, oh, well, the house neighboring me, the shared fence, she passed away about a year ago, but they're now remodeling that house. I said, okay, well, so the same kind of helping her transition. We come back into the living room. The tiny tea candle with the silver little tea candle had a 4-inch flame. The heat of that had burned through the thick Peruvian kind of altar cloth on the floor, and was now smoldering, burning her 1905 wooden floor. And I was like a gasp, and it was like, oh my gosh. But as I turn and look, there's 3 Native Americans sitting on the sofa, male. It's like I could paint it. It was so clear. This is our lands. We don't know the message. We have your back. We're here. Got my guides. We just see them. In taking my mother around Colorado, all right, we have 4 minutes. Taking my mom around Colorado on her 80th birthday. So it was high energy. We're on a bus. It's a beautiful day. We're in the Rocky Mountains. I look out, and from 3 mile high, whatever mile high the Rocky Mountains, red rocks are, from top to miles down was a perfectly shaped Native American profile that had just come from out of, right, the invisible. Our third is that we are of nature. Even the rocks thrill with memories of past events. The very dust beneath your feet responds more lovingly to our footsteps. Right? Because it's the ashes of our ancestors. So they're so alive. And so what I want to suggest in terms of looking at how does this support us is what would life and death and grief be like if we saw death as a transformative process, both for the individual dying and the grieving, as above, so below. So as we see the individual transforming and coming into a new being, a new life, it gives us reason to also experience that new life here in this 3D world. Again, as below, so above. When my daughter died, there were no books, role models to help me embrace a narrative that didn't stop with acceptance. Acceptance was its place, somewhere you may get to, but if you got there, you probably wouldn't stay long because you'd circle back to the grieving process. And all of that is true. I don't want to argue that. David Kessler's work includes a 6th stage of grief to find meaning, but not the same as transformation. What if there's a 7th stage, and acknowledging that out of pain and suffering, by definition, right, we can expect transformation, that it's a natural outcome. where something new emerges that didn't exist before and prior. As you work through, where was I in all this mess of my daughter's messy death? Where's God in all of this mess? What did I contribute? What did others contribute? Really digging deep and answering those questions. We would expect a transformation. What would happen if our fear of death, almost phobic fear of death, did not exist? Because we're hanging on to our loved ones way past their time. We're causing all this undue suffering. Would we be more supportive for the dying and grieving? I know people want to run out of the room if they haven't faced this reality themselves. And we live in a world that I think less and less people are facing this reality of the 4 cycles of life. And what if we would embrace the fact that we are of nature, that we return to the soil? What does it mean to us to embrace that we are only one of the planet's children? Eco grief is one of the fastest growing areas in psychology. And aside from grief, what if telepathy was real? What would that mean for mothers who have nonverbal children? What would it mean for us if we sat with a mother who said that she understands and can read their child's thoughts? How would we react to that? And how would you react to that now? Just quickly, I won't click in. I really want to leave time, but I've developed this course, The Conduit to Wellbeing, the vagus nerve, and it goes into 5 different ways in which to activate the vagus nerve. And this is great for people in grief because grief is grief. We're not going to change that. But with trauma that comes with some grief and the fight or flight is so activated, how is it that we can activate our parasympathetic? And I've took a very deep dive into all of this and have developed a course that is being offered through the Psychiatric Rehabilitation Association and also in the UK out of one of the 4 centers that certify and give diplomas in areas on well-being. What is there in activating the vagus nerve are ancient practices. All the conscious breath, the cold water, whether it's a lake, it's a river, it's these barrels, right? It's the singing, the humming, the chanting, the tamping, the drumming. All of these areas put into science can help people understand ways in which that they can reset their autonomic system even as they go through deep grief. And I want to stop this share now and just open it up for comments and questions.
Thank you, Paula. We felt the energy, definitely. Yes. I saw a first question. Help me out if I miss it. Alicia, please. Well, I'll start with the last question from Karen Koffler. So much of what you describe is of the sacred. How do you find the space in what is often the green of medical care in the US today? It seems we need to alter our current paradigm if we were to bring this aspect of care and engagement to fruition.
Yeah. I think we're heading to that. I feel like there's going to be, maybe in my lifetime, maybe not, but I feel like there's going to be an umbrella that's holistic health. It's something holistic health, and allopathic medicine is a critical piece of that umbrella. And I think we're maybe seeing I think we're in the midst of seeing that. East is meeting West. We say the South, the energy of the South, the wisdom of the South, the condor of the South, of the heart, is coming to meet the prophecy, of the North, the eagle, the mind, and the mind and the heart are meeting. And this was the prophecy of the 2012 prophecy. And clearly, the integrative medicine is East and West, and new things emerging from it. Right? The new is emerging from there's a transformative process happening. We're in the midst of it. It's a very exciting time. But yes, I've absolutely, the paradigm will shift in order to embrace some of what I think the field of quantum mechanics will be telling us. And then ultimately more research will be funded that supports the kinds of studies I talked about today. People will come into a more knowing. People are clamoring for interconnection in the spiritual clamoring of finding self that's going on right now. They're going to bring it forth. Yeah.
Juliet, this is Jeff. Can I ask you a question?
Sure, please.
So first of all, Paula, thank you so much for sharing the story with us. And for those of you who haven't read Paula's book, it's worth the time. I enjoyed it a lot. And as I was hearing you speak, I was thinking of the Shakespeare quote from Hamlet: "There are more things in heaven and earth ratio than are dreamt of in your philosophy." And of course, this is when Hamlet has just seen the ghost of his dead father. And this is changing the way he's thinking about the world and what he needs to do. And I would say that in my personal experience of things that are obvious and I can't touch, it follows a very standard old style Catholic Episcopal sort of framework. And I'm comfortable in that because it's what so many people do. What you described over a variety of different kinds of ways of thinking about the world was really helpful to hear, and to know there's so many different ways of thinking about these kinds of issues. And I guess my question for you is, thinking about your audience here for these grand rounds, what would you hope is our sort of take-home message as we're, taking care of people who are going through grief or dealing with their own grief? What do you hope we take from this?
Yeah. A few things. People are coming to you with these experiences. And just the more that we shift into this and normalizing those experiences, you'll hear them. You don't have to ask about them. You'll hear them because the shift is within. And you'll help normalize people's experiences. And it's important, particularly from the medical field, because people really look to medicine. A lot of, I think the holistic health is being real and people are trying different things. This fits within that. I think acknowledging it in a way that is maybe giving it more credence, I think, giving its due, and encouraging people to, pursue those things. And just being able to say, there's a lot of research that supports that experience. You may want to read about it. The after-death communication, most information, most concise was from the University of Texas, right? Because they're handing it as a handout. It's a prepared handout. I'm not sure the source of it, but what are we sharing with people and normalizing it, connecting with one's loved one, or feeling their presence and letting it be okay is one thing. I think seeing that the interest or exploring the quantum field, the inner information field, we have an impact all the time. We're sending dark energy darts all the time. I've worked with youth, and I've created destiny codes. Connect with self, connect with the nature, connect with the field, and you will then reach your highest destiny. That's how you'll co-create with what is. So know that the dark thoughts, the negative thoughts that we send about others, what goes around comes around. Ancient practice, ancient belief. And we're doing that all the time to each other. And I have youth stand up and I send them, not looking at me, and I send them an energy dart into their field. And their muscle test goes flat. They can't hold their energy. And we're doing that mind trip with people all the time. So I think a takeaway is being able to sit in this loving space out of judgment when anybody, Maybe that's the message, huh? Anybody walks into your office, because it's so hard. You see people doing such dumb things, really. You know what I mean? In a way, right? You have to say, it's just like dumb. Like, who would do that, right? I mean, I have clients, you go, why, what did you come up with every day? And so what I was trained was like this. Everyone walking in is a Buddha. Yeah. And you see their light. And I go back to Dr. Morgan's family, the strength-based approach, right? That is critical. Like, where's their strength? Where's the light? You know, and so it's light meeting light. And that's what we do in the Power of 8 groups. But you don't have to tell anybody anything that you're doing. You just do it. Yeah, the doctor, what was the study? Anyhow, he opened up the Ho'oponopono prayer. The physician, he was a psychiatrist, and they closed the psychiatric rehab place in Hawaii. This was like decades ago. And every day he opened up the folder and he just said a prayer for everybody in the center. And lots of things happened, I'm sure, at the same time. But it was like, after a while later, 10 years later, they closed the facility. So it's like that. We can use this power of the mind, power of prayer, to direct energy and practice with it. And for our own healing, we practice with it, I would say.
Thank you so much, Paula. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we are exactly at 1. So we have to finish, and thank you a lot. I just want to mention that there is another question, provocative question about artificial intelligence.
Right.
And how will that replacing human interactions? What will be the effect of that? I don't know if whoever can stay on, if you want to take that question. How would intention be expressed and experienced in a world of artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
So, but I realize people are leaving. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a good one. Look at Peter Mary's work, and he's writing on that. And I can send anyone. There's a great paper just recently written, like a white paper on AI and the need for AI and the quantum field to that research global consciousness to intersect. So if the person's still here, I can send that. Very interesting question.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Very good.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.